The viewpoints expressed on Night Fright are not necessarily those of the host, the staff, the sponsors, or the affiliate stations. Tonight's program may contain graphic themes or images. Viewer discretion is advised.
There is a time for question. There is a time for answers. There is a time to challenge. There is a time to speculate. There is a time for change. There is a time for truth. The time is now. Welcome to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Showtime! Welcome to the show. I'm Brent Holland, and welcome everybody to Night Fright. Get the coffee going, get the tea going, get a beverage of your choice going. An important show tonight with a very, very honored guest, folks. The Honorable Paul Hellyer is here tonight to discuss his new book, The Money Mafia, A World in Crisis. The Honorable Paul Hellyer, of course, served as an artillery gunner during the Second World War and was elected to Parliament in 1949, Canadian Parliament, by the way. At that time, he was the youngest MP ever elected to the Parliament. During that period, he served under Prime Minister Louis Saint Laurent as Associate Minister of National Defense. In 1963, Mr. Hellyer served as Minister of Defense in the cabinet of Nobel Peace Prize winner Lester B. Pearson. And he won that prize, folks, for peacekeeping. In 1968, under Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau, that's Justin's dad, most of you younger folk today know Justin, Mr. Hellyer served once again as a cabinet minister, this time as Minister of Transport. All through Mr. Hellyer, although Mr. Hellyer is best known for the unification of Canadian Armed Forces and for his 1968 chairmanship of the Task Force on Housing and Urban Development, he has maintained a lifelong interest in macroeconomics. Through the years, as a journalist and political commentator, he has continued to fight for economic reforms and has written several books on the subject. Now, I just want to read a quote, folks, to open up the show from his book, The Money Mafia. And it goes, "Since I published Light at the End of the Tunnel," that's his former book, in 2010, I've become more active on the UFO circuit and have made guest appearances on myriad radio shows and internet shows. I've tried to emphasize, to the extent that my hosts would allow, that there are three great problems for humankind. The number one in importance, global warming, because the future habitability of the planet is in jeopardy. The second in importance is the international banking and financial system. It is second in importance because, number one in urgency, because without revolutionary change, nation states will lack the fiscal flexibility to finance the changeover from fossil fuels to exotic clean energies. Number three is the extraterrestrial presence and technology. Its potential for good or ill is boundless, including the knowledge of the energy sources essential for our survival. All too often, my American cousins will say something along the following lines: Paul, I agree with every word you said except for that nonsense about global warming. That is just a hoax. What we are seeing is just a natural cycle, so you should check your facts on that one. Well, Mr. Hellyer, the floor is yours. I suggest we start and educate the folks right away on global warming. What do you say?
Well, I say that it's pretty obvious that the science shows that the global warming is number one, and that we're going to lose our planet as a decent place to live for millions and maybe billions of people if we don't do something about it right away. and that despite the millions and millions of dollars that the oil cartel has spent trying to confuse the issue, they have spent a lot of money, just like the tobacco companies, saying, well, the science isn't certain. Well, it is certain, because in my book, I think about 15 or 20 graphs that I took from the Globe and Mail, which show that every single graph of rising temperatures, whether it's the ocean or the air or the soil or whatever, and the reduction in ice caps and glaciers, and all of these things are all going in the wrong direction and have been for 20 years. So that is just, to me, it is overwhelming, and you can tell with the change in weather patterns that there's something very desperate going on. You get all sorts of floods that we never had before, and huge floods, that jeopardize people's lives. And then, of course, the permafrost is coming out of the Arctic, and the people up there are trying to figure out how to cope with a situation that they've never had to meet before. And it's happening all over the world. It is serious, and it's urgent. And in my book, I think I say that we've got about 7 years to do something about it. And here you're going to get the three amigos talking about trying to reduce emissions and meet certain targets in about 20 or 30 years. And it's a cruel hoax. I don't question their sincerity, but they should know better, especially President Obama, because he knows that zero-point energy exists, that the means to change over from fossil fuels to clean energy exists, and that if he, for example, issued a presidential decree that all of those patents were to be declared public and available to the people of the world, and then if they fixed the money problem, which is essential, they could do a miracle. They could do it in 7 years. But as I explained, I lived long enough I've seen it happen. In the 1939, and then a little later in the United States, we converted all of the plants that were making automobiles and washing machines and refrigerators and all of these domestic appliances into armaments. And what we have to do today is just the opposite. We have to take the armaments plants that are feeding the Middle East war and they're feeding wars all over, and convert them to zero-point energy boxes to install in every car, truck, airplane, motorcycle, and home in the whole world in 7 years. And not only would it provide hundreds of millions of jobs, which we desperately need at the present time, but it might save the planet to the extent that it would still be habitable for the majority, at least, of the people living on it. So this is urgent stuff. And to be talking about building pipelines that have a 30-year life amortization to pay for them and so on really doesn't make any sense. And I had a fire in my store in my house years ago, and I understand. If somebody phones and says your house is on fire, and say, well, don't worry, put a blanket over it, or throw some pail of water on it, or something like this. They're not stupid in a case like that, because they can see the flames around it. They didn't say that in Fort McMurray. They didn't say, well, there's no sense trying to put this fire out. There's no sense trying to contain it. Just let it go, and so what? Take out the rest of the city, and you can always build a new one if you've got to get around to it. People don't think foolishly if they're faced with the evidence right in front of their face. But when it depends on statistics and evidence that they don't have right in front of them, and say, well, it isn't really something. This is a long time change in weather patterns and so on. And maybe it is, but the present problem, we made most of it. We, the people of the earth, have been using fossil fuels to an extent that we've warmed up the atmosphere, and it's going in the wrong direction and at a very rapid rate. And if we don't do something right away, it's going to be too late. So this is, as far as I'm concerned, this is number one. And then we get to the passion of my life. Where are they going to get the money to pay for it? And that is number two, but it's the most urgent, because if you haven't got any money, you can't buy a 0-point energy box, you can't do anything.
Exactly right. And folks, I just wanted to mention too, you know, that once we change from an oil-based economy right through to a cleaner energy economy, not only will it clean the air, but it'll give more employment in the long run as well, and solid employment where people won't be putting themselves in jeopardy as well. So let's go to the banks now, sir, shall we?
There are a couple of side benefits, and that is if you have a winter ice storm, you've got your power in your basement, and you don't have to worry about a tree coming down over your hydro wires and having to freeze in the dark, as they used to say, until the brave men get around to fixing it up.
As a guy who went through the ice storm in Montreal, holy cow. Yeah, absolutely, without question, I agree with you. In his book, The Money Mafia, folks, he's got a great quote, and I just love this one. And it goes like this, and it's by a fellow by the name of Rip Bob Diamond. It says, give a man a gun, and he can rob a bank. Give a man a bank, and he can rob the world. And I thought when I read that, sir, wow, you hit the nail on the head.
It is the truth.
It is this, it's so truth. Now, you were saying that 5 cents for every dollar a bank lends you, they get 100% of that money back plus interest. This is nothing more, in my argument, it's a legal license to fabricate wealth from nothing and to steal money from the poor, because the poor...
It's grand larceny.
Completely.
One giant Ponzi scheme. You know, it makes ordinary Ponzi schemes look like plague.
Mm-hmm.
And here they have licenses which allow them, in effect, to buy the assets of the world for 5 cents on the dollar. And I say it's the difference between, they only have to have 5 cents of blood, sweat, and tears money. That's what I call it. But they can create a whole dollar and then demand to get the whole dollar back in blood, sweat, and tears money, plus interest. It's not just interest on the 5 cents, it's interest on the whole dollar. And so they're getting back $1.05, $1.10, $1.15, depending on how long it takes to pay off the loan. And it can go, can go to $2, can go to $3 if the people can't pay it off for a long time. And they've been buying up the assets of the world this way, and still are. And it really, I think, puts it in perspective. If you remember that maybe 4 or 5 years ago, 88 families owned 50% of the wealth of the world.
Yeah.
And then that dropped to 80. And then the last count was 62 families. 62 families own half of all the wealth in the whole world. The whole world. I try and get my head around it, but I can't. I really can't.
Neither can I.
Because you say, think of the cities, Tokyo, Beijing, San Francisco, Vancouver, Chicago, New York, Toronto, Montreal, London, Paris, Frankfurt, and on it goes all the way around the world. And you take and divide them, every second one of those cities is owned lock, stock, and barrel by 62 families. And they do that because the whole thing is mortgaged, in effect, to them. It is owed to them, and they either get paid for it or they own the assets outright. And it is so unfair is too tame a word, and I don't know. Pardon me?
It's pervasive as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you, and we have to stop it. because not only are they going to wind up with 70 or 80% of the whole world's wealth, they use that power to make us jump through hoops. They decide our future instead of us deciding. And this, in my opinion, is almost as bad, because democracy, we talk about it, we say, the United States is a Democratic Party. Well, excuse me, hasn't been democratic since the days of Truman. There hasn't been a president of the United States since then. It's been in the loop for number 3 problem. And the people that own the world have been running the United States and much of the rest of the world for decades, and still are. And look at Canada, for example. We're planning to borrow enough money to get our economy stimulated, but not stimulated enough. Every day when I pick up the paper, there's something that's short of money. It's either for the First Nations, we say, hey, we're going to give you a break for a change. After persecuting you for 100 years, we're going to start making amends, as a token at least of our goodwill. We haven't got the money to do it. Mm-hmm. And now the provinces are saying we haven't got enough money for health care. And the federal government's saying, well, don't look here. And then in our papers in Toronto, this week they're closing down schools in order to save staff for cleaning them. And the kids are going to have to walk further, and people are being let out of work, losing jobs when there are 1.4 million unemployed already. Yeah. And so all of these things say money, money, money. We need money. So the government says, well, we're going to borrow it for you. Well, you have to put these things in perspective. If they borrow more, we're going to be in worse shape in 4 years than we are now. We're not going to be out of it. It isn't going to magically turn into a robust country like we had in the early post-war years. It's going to the sort of same kind of, slow growth, moribund economy, too much unemployment, austerity is the word really, is just going to continue. And we've already, interestingly enough, I lived through the Depression, the Great Depression.
Yes, sir.
And it is very similar to the 1930s. And
what's happening right now?
Yeah, exactly. And we've got, it's lasted longer already, from 2007 until 2016, and there's no end in sight. So,
sir, you lived through and were part of the most productive time, I would argue, in Canadian history, when so much infrastructure was built under Louis Saint Laurent.
Right.
A fabulous period of time for Canada, and growth and everything. What can we do? What lessons can we learn from that you were part of and bring forward to today?
Well, the fundamental lesson. You have to have the money creation function shared between the government of Canada and the private banks. Today, the banks have a monopoly. There is no other way to get money into the economy today except to borrow it. And money is the gasoline on which the engine of economics, the engine of the country, really works. And you have to have new money coming in all the time for the economy to expand. And just the same amount as last year isn't good enough, especially when a lot of it's being siphoned off to pay the interest on what we already owe. So you have to have a major change, and the fact that the government has chosen to borrow money is, in my opinion, the wrong solution. I hate to say the word wrong, but I mean, you might as well call a spade, I think. And it is not the solution that is best based on our own experience. Well, here, let me go back. 1938, no jobs in Canada. None.
Zero, folks.
Zero.
Yeah.
And then 1939, pretty soon along comes the war. And it wasn't long before everybody was working in the armed forces, the Army, Navy, or Air Force, or building factories or building munitions. And we achieved a world record for ourselves, 1% unemployment, going from high unemployment to 1%. And I'm not recommending that today, but I would like to see our unemployment reduced by 50%, which is about the kind of balance that it should have. So this system, and I should say, where did the government get the money to do that? Well, the Bank of Canada printed it. P-R-I-N-T-E-D.
Yeah.
That's the simple English word. They printed, in that case, it was actual bills, not the just computer entries that we have today. But they printed a lot of money, and I was in the Air Force first, and then, as you say, a gunner during the war, and we'd get our pay in cash. And there was a lot of cash around in those days, not much today, but in those days there was a lot. So the government got this money, and what they did, they gave the Bank of Canada a bond, and the Bank of Canada bought it for cash. And the government paid the Bank of Canada interest on the bond, very low interest. But the Bank of Canada gave it back to the government as dividends, because we own all the shares of the bank. And the cost is near zero. It was just the cost of administration.
That's all it was.
Deducted, yeah.
Sir, can we explain, because a lot of my my demographic is not only the youth of today, and large part of it is Canadian, but a large part of it is American as well, and their system under the Fed is a little bit different than ours. Can we explain the basic differences between the two?
Yeah, the basic difference is that their Congress sold them out 103 years ago and transferred their money-making power to a group of the wealthiest bankers in the world. And I guess if you want to fault the people that did that, that would be fair enough. But then you have to fault the congressmen and congresswomen who for 103 years have done nothing about it. So they have, I think, $17 trillion in debt today, something like that.
Yeah,
There wasn't a cent of it that was necessary. And they have been borrowing from the very organizations that they set up, presumably to rescue them and to run their system for them. And as far as the United States is concerned, what they're going to have to do is what our Prime Minister did in 1938. Our Bank of Canada was established as a private bank in 1935. In 1938, Prime Minister Mackenzie King, on the advice of one of his MPs, a former mayor of Vancouver, said, we're going to buy all the shares. So they did. So we owned it, lock, stock, and barrel, before the war started. And consequently, we got through, in good shape.
Yeah.
The Americans are going to have to nationalize the Fed. There is no way out of it. And I know that, there will be one gosh awful cry from the poor bankers.
Oh, I can hear it now. Communism, communism.
Absolutely, communism. And in somewhere in my book, I listed some of the results of a partial audit that they did after Ron Paul insisted.
Yes.
And trillions of dollars they created for their favorite banks and corporations owned by those same banks. In other words, the money mafia. And so it is just absolutely insane. They called it, this was after the meltdown, and the people of the United States had already put up $700 billion to save the banks because they were supposedly too big to fail. But what the Fed didn't tell them was that they were putting up trillions in addition to that of diluting the money in order to rescue their favorite banks, the ones that really control them. And the corporations, their favorite corporations that are controlled by their favorite banks. So that was all kind of inside stuff.
Sir, please go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
We avoided that problem by nationalizing our bank of central bank decades ago. And then this system that got us through a war continued after the war. And it was used, as you said, for infrastructure.
Yes, sir.
Through the period of Semerau and Pearson in particular, and it helped to build the
North Seaway and Trans-Canada, all these wonderful, wonderful things.
The DEALEY line, most people of your listeners wouldn't have heard of the DEALEY line, but my office, when I was Minister of National Defense, had all of those little dots behind a map so that nobody knew they were there. And they went right around the periphery of the country. They were to warn if the Soviet bombers were coming in. And they were expensive. This is a deal we made with the Americans. You do this and we'll do that. And they were expensive, and we built them all. And then in addition, helped the provinces and the municipalities with some other projects. I'm sure the Gardner Expressway, which should have come down long ago, was subsidized by the federal government and other projects. And in addition to that, we laid the foundation for our social security system.
Exactly.
Which was very expensive, and at the time was very good. One of the best. Not so good now, but very good. And we did all of this without accumulating any significant debt. And then, would you believe, in 1974, the governor of the bank, Gerald Bowie, was seduced into working for the Bank for International Settlements. When I say working with, maybe would be better. I think they put Canada on a committee to make us feel as if we were important. And he made a speech out west saying that we were going to adopt monetarism. Now, what he didn't say was what monetarism meant. Maybe he didn't know. I have some doubts as to whether he really understood what he was doing or not. But the things that resulted from that were two. One, that the central banks of the world would fight cost-push inflation with high interest rates and crush the economies. And secondly, that no more cheap money for governments. Cut off the supply of cheap money. So,
what was the idea behind that? Was that, when they say there's too much of a product, it loses value? Was that because they figured they'd get the product out of the way and then the dollar would go up somehow in value?
It wasn't an exchange thing.
Okay.
We had a little bit of inflation, too much, I would say, in the late 60s and 70s. And it was primarily, must be precise, was primarily cost push. It was because wages were going up several times faster than productivity.
I see.
For 25 years in a row. Never happened before in history. Never has made it since into the textbooks that our young economists are learning from. So they still don't know what happened because it's not there.
There's no precedent. Mm-hmm.
That was what caused the inflation. So here you get the banking community said, well, we've got a little problem here. We won't take a hoe to it. We'll take an atomic bomb and we'll wreck the system, which, and put millions of people out of work and thousands of people out of their homes and their businesses going bankrupt. I was at the time an auction buff, and I would go to sales where businesses were getting rid of their paintings and their furniture, 20 cents on the dollar. And it was, you could almost cry for them. But in any event, as a result of having to borrow in the market, and in the first Great Recession after this inflation occurred, and after we decided to go along with the guys in Switzerland, and the money mafia. Paul Volcker decided to put monetarism to the test, and he ran interest rates up to 18% in the United States. And we went better. We went to 22.
I remember that. Mm-hmm.
And well, I do too. Actually, I benefited from that recession because I bought a condo for cost, which is beautiful. And I'm very grateful as an individual, but I really, all my life, I'm trying to end recessions and depressions because they're not necessary. But in any event, that was one thing we did. And then as a result of borrowing in the market, we accumulated a lot of debt. And we were just starting to get out from under a little bit of it. And along came another recession 10 years later, in 1991. And so in that period, from 74, 75 to 2010-11, we have not only accumulated $615 billion in debt, we have paid, and this staggers me, $1.1 trillion interest on it. Trillion. And, you know, I was talking about reading the papers and where we need money to do this because we've been underfunding. We've been underfunding the First Nations. We've been underfunding healthcare. People say your healthcare is, well, it's the wait times and all this sort of stuff have been getting worse because they're underfunded.
Yeah, not enough people, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, and the same with education.
Yeah,
tuition
loans.
Tuition fees have gone way up, and students are having to borrow tons of money to get through their studies, which we never had to do. And all of these things because there was no way of getting money into the system other than borrowing. And I wrote an open letter to the Prime Minister just a few weeks ago. It's pointed out that from 1867, when our country became a confederation, until 1974, we had only accumulated something like $21.6 billion in debt. And here we were, between 74, 5, and 2010-11.
1.1 trillion.
Yeah, but the debt's still there. It's $615 billion.
Exactly right.
And we're going up at a rate of about 25 billion a year if we don't change course, which we have to do. So I'm probably, as you may know, I'm a part of an organization called Canadian Bank Reformers.
Yes, sir.
It's similar. It's a lot of the people who are in COMER, the Canadian Committee on Monetary and Economic Reform, which has been around for years and which is suing the Bank of Canada because it hasn't been doing its job. But that is going to take time because every time we win a case and it's appealed and then we lose the appeal and so on. And by the time Rocco Galati, our very, very able attorney, gets around to getting it to the Supreme Court, it may be 2, 3, 4 years from now. In the meantime, this whole generation of young people, about 1 million young people in Canada, haven't had a life.
That's right.
They can work at McDonald's and they can make beds, go to the hotels for a few hours and something, 2 or 3 jobs, and put a roof over their head. Not necessarily a good roof, but a roof maybe. But just they're living in virtual poverty. And it is not necessary.
Not in our country.
No, it is not.
The JFK Assassination, the definitive book by Brent Holland. From inside the Oval Office to Daily Plaza, first-person witness accounts. Order yours right now. nightfrightshow.com.
Can I just read a quote, sir, from your letter to Mr. Trudeau? This is Mr. Justin Trudeau, by the way, folks, our Prime Minister. And as Mr. Hellyer has just said, he's written this letter directly to him, and this is a quote from it. Canadians own the patent to create money. Private banks have no rights They are only licensees, which must obey rules set by Parliament. Parliament, of course, we the people of Canada.
Absolutely.
And I had no idea. I thought we were more like the Fed till I read that, you see. So this is where we differ again. Now, why is the government in debt? When we have the right to print money, why are we even charging any interest on it and accumulating $1 trillion worth of interest? I don't understand why the government is willing to put up with this.
Well, it's because their advisors are nearly all what are called neoliberals, who are people who believe in one world economy and who don't believe in using the powers of a nation state for the benefit of the people of that nation. And they're giving the government very bad advice. I know that. And they have one of them, I won't name him because
it's okay.
But one of them who was advising them was the deputy minister and later governor of the bank. And when at a meeting to celebrate Alan McKicken's departure from active politics, they had 3 economists there, and they were the cream of the crop, as the saying goes. And they were saying how bad things were, and they doom and gloom and didn't know what to do about it. So when they got to the audience, floor mics, I grabbed one of the mics and said, well, why don't we use the solution that we used to get out of the Great Depression and through the war? And not one of the 3 was willing to tackle the question, not one. So the MC said, well, I guess we'll have to put that question to the deputy minister. And the deputy minister said, Mr. Hellyer's solution would be inflationary. No explanation, no evidence, no rationale, nothing. Plus the fact it wasn't true. Because we didn't have inflation when we were doing this, when we were sharing the money creation function with the private banks.
Yes.
We were the same as the rest of the world, and we had no reason to worry about it at the time, and we have no reason to worry about doing the same thing again and making it work. But this was just a knee-jerk reaction. There are 2 knee-jerk reactions that are worth thinking about. Nearly all of my friends think that when you go into the bank to borrow money, that the money they lend you is what somebody else deposited the day before. They don't realize that the banks are fully lent nearly all of the time. And so they actually create the money that they lend to you. And it's an interesting process because you go in and you want $35,000 to buy a car. So you see your friendly banker, tell them what you want, and they ask you for collateral. It could be stocks or bonds or second mortgage on your cottage or whatever, or somebody with a few bucks co-signing for you. Once they're satisfied on this, you are asked to sign a note for $35,000. And you do, and the bank's satisfied. They tap their computer, and $35,000 appears in your account that you can go out and buy the car with. Seconds later, that money did not exist.
Yep.
Created out of thin air. And that's really the basis of the problem. That's this ratio.
Is crazy. And what ends up happening, folks, of course, you've just borrowed this $35,000 that's non-existent for the bank, but it's very existent for you. If you try to pay back even 1 penny less than $35,000, they're going to nail you for it. So they've just made $35,000 profit.
Oh,
just like that.
Yeah, except the 5% of
that they have to keep in their pockets. Yeah.
Well, they don't keep it in their pockets. They had to invest to have this.
Quote unquote.
Yeah.
So it's a heck of a business. Do you want to start a bank, sir? I'm being facetious, but it can't continue. Because it's bloated, it's inflated, it's collapsing.
It is collapsing. And in that letter to the Prime Minister, I said that it's been cracked for years, and now it's broken.
And now it's completely broken.
And there's no way out of it mathematically except to put in a huge infusion of government-created debt-free money.
This is the solution, folks.
Yeah, and this is what we're proposing, our little group. And we're saying it would just create a miracle.
Mm-hmm.
Because what we're saying is that we want to reduce the bank ratio, which is 20 to 1 at the moment. And we want to get the government ratio from 0 to 34%.
Yep.
Cash. So our formula is to have the government print some shares in Canada, nominal 10 billion, non-convertible, non-redeemable shares, and give them to the Bank of Canada as collateral. And the bank create it, 150 billion, and put it in the government's bank accounts, and then split it 50-50 with the provinces on a per capita basis. So it would do a lot to solve a problem that's existed for as long as I've been around.
Well, this sounds like a perfect solution, sir. One of the things I wanted to ask you, would there be restrictions on where the provinces could spend the money?
No.
None at all. So they could put it into infrastructure, they could put it in job creation, hospitals.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's half of the benefit. Get the federal government out of the province's hair and not have to have 3 people make the same decision or agree on the same decision. Just get the money out there and let the provinces and then let them turn money over to the municipalities to make some of their own decisions and so on, and not have some guy, maybe very bright in I was going to say Washington, but I mean Ottawa, trying to decide what kind of a pipe to put in Lethbridge or something or other.
Yeah.
Don't know the problem, not familiar with it. There's no way. That's communism, if you're looking for it. It's just too much interference. It's micromanaging.
Exactly right.
Rather than letting people do what has to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And some provinces would want to spend more on infrastructure and some less. And some more on healthcare and some less. Some more on education and some less. Some more on arts and some less. Let them do what they want to do, and it depends on the rate of unemployment in these areas and how much deficit there is from underfunding in all these years.
Mm-hmm.
But they can do it, and they can do it fast. And we're suggesting that they do this for 7 years so that they can start big projects and know that the money would be around to finish them. And now, coming back to the inflationary thing, we're saying that the law would be changed to reintroduce cash reserves. Because over the years, they've gone from 100% cash reserves, then 50, and 25, and then 8 in Canada when I was smaller, to 0. And in our country, there are no cash reserves required since 1991. And all they have is probably 1 cent or 1.5 cents for every dollar you think you have in the bank.
Mm.
And the only reason they can get away with it is the same way that the goldsmiths of Lombard Street did 300 and some odd years ago, is because we don't all go in and say, hey, I want to take out all my money.
Yeah, we don't run on the banks all at once.
No, we don't run on the banks all at once. We use debit cards and we use checks. And consequently, the bank can lend 50 times as much as they have actual cash in their vaults. So these are myths. And it's the same thing with inflation, because what we're suggesting is that the cash reserves be increased by 5% a year for 7 years,
Mm-hmm.
until it comes to 34%. It's 1% less than 5. That's 34. After the 7 years, that the money creation function be split between 34% between governments, which would allow governments at all levels, federal, provincial, municipal, to do their thing with balanced budgets and lower tax rates than we have now. And in addition, during the 7 years, there would be enough surplus to pay down some of the existing debt. And I have estimated that if they wanted to, they could probably pay down a third of the federal debt in those 7 years.
In those 7 years, that'd be great.
Now,
Yeah.
so this is the way to go as far as I'm concerned. There are other suggestions in other countries, and some of them are okay.
Mm-hmm.
But there's none that is, first of all, as gradual as this allows time for everybody to adjust, for the banking industry to adjust, and for governments to adjust and to change the system. And secondly, when it's all over, you have enough money for the governments at all levels without going into debt, no more deficits, and you have enough money for the banks to do what they should be doing. And that is lending money to small business to grow and lending money to individuals where they're in trouble and need this sort of thing, and not financing hedge funds and huge multi-billion-dollar takeovers so that all the companies can be brought together into an oligarchy and so that they can set prices the way that is being done in gasoline and oil
and everything else along with it. Sir, on June 4th, 1963, JFK issued an executive order, which I'm sure you're familiar with, 11110. Now, it essentially took the government off the Federal Reserve. What was your perspective of that back in the, because you were in government at the time. You were an MP in 1963 under Mr. Pearson.
Yeah, I think what he was doing, he was demonstrating that the government could do something, and he issued these with the backing of, there were silver certificates.
That's right, yeah.
So they weren't Federal Reserve notes, they were silver certificates, and they were backed by the silver in the Treasury, and he had the authority to do that without having to repeal the Federal Reserve Act and to buy the thing up, which, and I don't think, personally, some people think that he lost his life because of that. I don't think so. There are other reasons.
I think so too. I agree with you.
So it's not like a repeat of Lincoln. And now, to come back to the overall.
Yes, sir.
Canada is the best situated of the G20 to do what has to be done.
Why is that, sir?
Because we have a precedent. And I call it the Canadian precedent in my book. We have done it before, and we can do it again. It's an old song. We have done it before, and we can do it again. Secondly, we own all the shares of the Bank of Canada. Thirdly, the Bank of Canada Act says that the Minister of Finance has the final say, regardless of what the governor says. And all he has to do, if there's a disagreement, is to put in writing what he wants the governor to do, and then to have it published in the Canada Gazette. Now, nobody else has got all that advantage. And we could do it in a matter of weeks if the government wanted to. And then maybe Great Britain or someone else that owns their bank would start. And then perhaps the European people would say, well, we're going to have to change the law, change our treaty, so that the European Central Bank can create money for the central banks of the member states. And if we did that, we could save the world from its present disastrous course, because there's going to be another meltdown if we don't do anything. Everybody's saying this. It's just a question of when. And we could help avoid that happening by offering hope and getting the show on the road, as the saying goes, and do something about the 250 million people that the Davos people said would be unemployed this year, 2016. 250 million.
People don't understand that each one of these people, folks, is a life. It's somebody struggling to put food on the table, not only for themselves, but for their families as well. And in a country as rich as Canada and the United States and the European Union, I think that's a perversion. While there's people flying private planes and things of that nature and spending $1.7 million on a car, for example, I think there's some perversion there, and I think we need to address that very, very seriously. And I think Mr. Hellyer has given us some great examples how we can make solutions to that. Sir, I just wanted to ask you, I want to go back to 63, kind of as an aside. Did you work with McNamara?
Yes, we were opposite numbers.
Okay. And is there anything, we never had a chance to get into the UFO thing, but was there anything that he was concerned with that he may have told you about?
No, he said he'd tell me anything I wanted to know, but I didn't know what to ask.
Right, I hear you. Okay. But you worked on the DEW line together and everything.
What he wanted me to do was to join them in the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And I said, thanks, but no thanks, knowing that my boss would say thanks, but no thanks. And then he wanted us to always spend more. And of course, the Americans are doing exactly the same thing with all the NATO members at the present time, trying to get them to spend more money. Well, guess what happens? They buy the arms from the United States, and the military-industrial complex, which General Eisenhower warned us about, gets richer and richer and richer, more powerful, and lining their pockets and being able to do a lot of black operations and other things that they wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So there are a lot of problems, but we've got to start somewhere with something that's manageable. And what I'm suggesting, or what we are suggesting in the Canadian bank reformers, is let's take this huge step forward and start it here, and then maybe it'll roll around the world, and then start on the next step, which is to start making zero-point energy machines, installing them, and substituting those, building them in Calgary and Edmonton and other places right across the country, and getting ready for the future, rather than trying to hold on to the past.
Has Mr. Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, responded to your letter? Has anybody from Parliament responded? Not at all. Not even an acknowledgement of receipt?
Well, no, not on that one, because that was an open letter. I've had other correspondence with him and with his advisors, and they know where I stand, but they are, as I said, they're getting advice from the civil service that is loaded in the direction of the people who are running the world. And I know that there are some people there that are there as a result of, call it infiltration or whatever you want to call it, but that have been sent to various universities and various government departments to keep peddling the party line, as I call it.
The party line, for sure, the status quo. You know, sir, we've gone through monarchies, I'm thinking communism, socialism, and capitalism. None of them have seemed to work. The poor are still poor, the rich are richer, if anything. Is it time, perhaps, for a new mindset based on the value of a human being and not necessarily its monetary equivalent? I can ask, is it indeed time for a newism, perhaps something called humanism, where we take that into account as well?
Certainly, humanism is something we should try and take into account. I still think that, as Churchill said, democracy is the worst system of government in the world, except for all others. But we haven't got democracy.
Not anymore.
We have an oligarchy. And that's feudalism.
Democracy relies on a strong middle class, and it's gone.
Yeah, and it depends on having some power and authority and dedication by the people who were elected and running the show. And there are too many of them that I think that just been groping. I give this example. The G20
We've got a minute left, sir. I'm sorry.
G20 has been trying for 20 years to patch up, since 2007, to patch up the old financial system. Refuse to understand and say it's broke. It's time to do something different.
And it's to, the only question remains, who's going to be first? We all know it's broke, and I think you offer some solid solutions to get people working again and becoming human beings again. That was the total goal of being Canadian from the very beginning. Sir, I want to thank you so much. It's been an honor to speak with you. As always, you have a forum here anytime you want. And with your permission, I'd like to put your letter to Mr. Trudeau on the show as well. I'm Brent Holland from Night Fright. Paul Hellyer has been our guest tonight, the Honorable. Thank you all for joining us. See you soon.
You're listening to Night Fright and your host, Brent Holland. The time is now. Your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy. The JFK Assassination, the definitive book by Brent Holland. From inside the Oval Office to Daily Plaza, first-person witness accounts. Order yours right now. nightfrightshow.com.